Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lindsay, a member of the CK-12 team, and my colleague Ryan and I will be running today's webinar called Using FlexBooks with Students. We're so glad that you've joined us. Before I introduce you to Ryan, I'd like to go over a few logistics about the Zoom webinar platform. Looks like the conversation is well underway in the chat window, which is awesome. What we need you guys to remember is that if you want everyone to see your message, I think this visual might be old. I believe your window is going to say all panelists and attendees. So make sure that instead of just sending it to all panelists, only people here in this room at CK-12 will get your message. Change it to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see it. And then the Q&A window is where we want you to ask any questions for Ryan or our CK-12 team who will be responding via text. And we also have a guest presenter today, and you might have questions for her as well. We don't anticipate any technical difficulties, but if we have any, please let us know in either of these windows. So we are getting down to the end of this summer's CK-12 Certified Educator Program. As you guys know, you can find all session information, assignments, and archived videos on our program homepage, which is ck12.org/certified2017. Our registration page is relevant for 2 more sessions. Your last chances to join us for summer learning is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time for Maximizing Learning with CK-12. And then on Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m., we have another Maximizing Learning with CK-12. So this is a mandatory session for those of you wanting to finish the program. So hopefully you guys are all registered for one of those. If you aren't, you can still go to ck12.org/jumpstart to register. Today's session on using FlexBooks with students is part of our content pathway, where I imagine a lot of you joined us for either adopting CK-12 curriculum, FlexBooks 101, Advanced FlexBooks. Today, Ryan's here to really tie it all together of now that you know how to use the tool, in what context would you be using it? How do you use it with students? What are some best practices and some teaching strategies for your classrooms? So that's what's going on today. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Ryan, and he's going to get you started with today's content.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thank you to everyone who's joined us here today. In this webinar, we'll be covering the following topics. First, we'll take a look at choosing the best FlexBooks in order to use with your students. Next, as Lindsay mentioned, we'll actually have a live question and answer with a CK-12 user who has a particularly interesting case study. And last but not least, we'll be taking a look at strategies for using your FlexBooks. We'll look at them for using it in class time, outside of class time, but our main goal is that by the end of this session, you will come away with specific and actionable strategies to engage your students using CK-12 FlexBooks. But before we get into the core content of the webinar, it would be great if we found out a little bit more about you. You'll see a poll here in a few seconds that will prompt you to respond to a question. This information will help us have a better context of your current FlexBook use. So go ahead and answer the following question. How do you currently utilize FlexBooks in your teaching? So we'll wait just a couple more seconds. And we'll take a look at the results. So it looks like most of us have never really used FlexBooks before. So hopefully this can give you some actionable strategies so that you can go ahead and start using FlexBooks in your practice. Some of you have used it as a supplemental resource, but hopefully today will give you more actionable items where you can really customize it, tailor it to your practice, so maybe you can make it a more primary focal point of your teaching. So at this point then, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started by jumping into this idea of what are FlexBooks and how are we going to choose the best FlexBook to use with your students. So first of all, what is a FlexBook? The FlexBook platform allows users to edit or create content to produce a custom FlexBook. Why should I use it? FlexBooks are ready to use and easy to tailor to your specific course and share with your students. And where do I get it? In addition to the website, there's a free CK-12 FlexBook app available for all smartphones and tablets. And it's available on both iOS and the Android Play Store. In terms of the FlexBooks that we offer, I'm going to recommend different ways of finding the best FlexBook for your use. We'll try and demo all of these various ways of finding FlexBooks throughout today's webinar. The first one is choosing a FlexBook based on standards. From the teacher homepage, you can find a standards browser that can help you to identify a FlexBook that would best align with a set of standards that fits your particular needs. Next, you can also choose a FlexBook from our Browse page. From the main Browse page, you can choose a specific subject that is most directly aligned to what you need, and then click on the tab for FlexBook textbooks. Another option is that you can choose a FlexBook from user contributions. If you do a search for a topic, you can filter results based on what has been contributed by the community, and then you can also filter it by resource type. This is a great place to look for resources other than math and science, which is what CK-12 primarily provides. Another option is that you can actually choose a FlexBook based on nearby schools. So if you're on the home page, you can browse to the schools page where you can find other schools that may be customizing or creating FlexBooks in your state or region that could provide a valuable starting point for any work you may want to do. And if none of those options fit your needs, you can always create a FlexBook from scratch. If you go to your library, there is an option to create a new FlexBook. This will create a brand new FlexBook for you to work on. You can now add content from other resources by going to something you want to add and choosing Add to FlexBook Textbook. Then make sure you choose the correct FlexBook to transfer the material to. With this being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into introducing our panelist, our guest in just a second. And she is actually in that case where she decided to create her own FlexBook. She didn't feel like there was really a resource out there that would really fit the needs she had. So I want to take a moment and I'll be introducing Kamala Dorsner. So she has her PhD in Energy and Environmental Policy from the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy in the University of Delaware. She currently works for an NGO in Croatia, and the NGO is the Center for Ecological Literacy. She also works in her spare time for the University of the People, which is where she really worked to develop this resource for that particular program. And the name of the resource is The Essentials of Environmental Science. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring up Kamala, and we're going to hear from her for a second, and then we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. So first of all, thank you for joining us. I know it's after midnight in Croatia for you, so we really appreciate you being here.
Hello, Ryan. Thank you. Hello, everyone. And greetings from sunny Split, Croatia. As Ryan introduced me already, but yes, my name is Kamala Dorsner. I work as an instructor at the University of the People. I've been teaching environmental science there since 2013. And I'm here to share my experience with flexible book development and its application in my classroom. The title of the book, which Ryan has mentioned, is Essentials of Environmental Science. This is the resource I created in 2015 on CK-12 platform. Ryan asked me about my motivation for developing this textbook, and it was primarily for the students of environmental science to have a single resource they can download and use to prepare for class discussions and for the exams. In addition, at University of the People, we use only open educational resources in order to lower the cost for the students and to make the quality education available for everyone. My students, they normally access the book by logging into the course syllabus page where the link for the book is found. Since we are an exclusively online university, we communicate and meet in a learning environment called Moodle. And my experience has been very rewarding regarding the use of CK-12 platform, from creating the resource to accessing it. And I found it to be very reliable and user-friendly. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have about my experience.
Great, thank you with that. So we'll wait for a question to come in. And while we're waiting, I'll ask my first question. So
Okay.
why did you choose specifically to author your textbook on the CK-12 platform?
I found the CK-12 platform to be really reliable, and I liked the way the site breaks down traditional book chapters into smaller bite-sized ideas. And this is, I found it really user-friendly. So and I also could insert, for example, in the class discussions, I could insert a link to a specific page during a class discussion, which is referred in the book. So the students can directly go to that specific page when we discuss a certain concept.
Great. It looks like we had a couple more questions coming in. One user asked, was it time consuming to develop your textbook?
The book, I have developed the book as a part of a larger project, which was to redevelop the entire course. And I developed the book in 3 months. But I also developed, along with the book, I developed a discussion sections, assignment, and quizzes that are like that are based on the textbook. So yes, it took me 3 months to create this book.
Great.
Just to add, it was just the initial, but then I did make some refinements, and I'm making them like all the time.
That's great. So you're able to keep the resource current for your students.
Yes, that's right.
So the next question was it written primarily for a university level?
Yes.
Great. We'll see if there's any more questions that come here. Oh, there's one more. It says, what initial challenges did you encounter when you were starting your FlexBook?
It was I would say the greatest challenge was sourcing the material, sourcing the quality material. I knew which topics I wanted to include, but I didn't exactly know where to find all the material that was suitable. That was one thing. Another thing was finding a material which is compatible with a Creative Commons license on CK-12 website, which is CC by NC. So it took some time to research the compatibility of Creative Commons licenses.
Great. Another question I think is particularly interesting says, do you think that your students enjoy using a digital or online text rather than using a traditional printed text?
I don't know if they really enjoy, but I think that according to the feedback I received from students, they are very grateful that they can have one resource they can rely on. And I think that they appreciate that they never had any technical problems with downloading the book. And that would be it. I think that so far I have received many emails from students who say that they appreciate having the book a single resource which they can use to download and to study for the course I'm teaching.
That's wonderful. So I think we just have a couple more questions. One is mainly around did you find it hard to find information? Some people were scared about maybe like copyright issues. So do you have any particular advice for people finding information easily that fits that licensing that you talked about?
Oh, well, one of the one of the main challenges was like researching the Creative Commons licenses and how they're compatible with each other. This is something not to be scared of. Just take some time to find it, and this information is like readily available on the internet. Sorry, I didn't get the second. There was a second question as well.
Well, maybe any specific advice on finding those resources? Like, I remember you talked to me about you went to a library and you kind of talked to a librarian there. But did you have any specific places that you had really good success finding resources to add?
I remember I visited a website called College Open Textbooks, and there I found links to some other textbook. It is good to find one good website, and it can take you to then different websites and with different sources. But since I am also teaching in an international environment, I was trying to diversify my sources. So to try, I gave my best to find sources from the United States, but also from Europe, from Australia, from just to have sort of kind of a balance coverage of the topics.
Great. And then a lot of people are asking if they're able to find your resource. So would that be okay if we make sure we share the resource so others can view it?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Great. So we'll be sure to share that in the chat for everyone. And then people asked, did you use any of the resources on CK-12, or did you feel like you primarily had to find additional content other places because you were sourcing for a college text?
Well, the CK-12 website has a wealth of information and great content that teachers can use in their classroom. And I did incorporate some content from CK-12, but I also, the topics that the book was covering incorporated in the book. Some topics could not be found on CK-12. And then I searched for some other trustworthy sources, including US government publications, United Nations papers, World Bank, European Environment Agency, many different sources. I went through in a very short time. I searched and found various sources to include. But yes, some sources, some topics came from CK-12 website, but some unfortunately that couldn't be found there came from other reliable sources.
Great, and I think we'll finish just with one last question that I have for you. Can you describe any like aha moments that you've had maybe either in developing your FlexBook or using it with your students, things that kind of stick out in your mind from this whole process?
I don't know that I really had an aha moment, but it was really interesting that many students this is the feedback I didn't expect, but many students have sent me a feedback saying that they're really happy that they have a textbook with many pretty images and pictures. So they say that they facilitated their learning. And this was something that was like, I said, wow, really? I was surprised to hear that.
Well, that's great. And I just want to thank you again for being with us this evening and fielding all of these questions. If you need to go to sleep, we totally understand at this point, but thank you so much again for sharing your experience today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Ryan. I'll see if I can stay as long as possible and participate in this discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so at this point, we're gonna go ahead and transition into the next part of the webinar, which now that we've seen that actual kind of user example that hopefully is really inspiring, talking about making her own custom FlexBook, we're gonna talk specifically about strategies. So we wanna give you those strategies for using FlexBooks for your particular use in your classroom. So the first strategy that we're gonna discuss is building digital learning playlists by adding links to other resources. So CK-12 FlexBooks can provide resources from videos to adaptive practice. You could include links to interactive content. So you can make a fully interactive learning environment. Another potential strategy is that you could use FlexBooks to flip your classroom. So CK-12 resources can be an effective resource for those looking to flip their classroom. Students could utilize FlexBooks, videos, all of these resources outside of class time, so that during class time, you could produce discussions, labs, and other types of interactive group activities. Another possible strategy is that you can produce a fully paperless classroom. Since CK-12 FlexBooks can be used in several ways, they're a very easy resource to utilize without a need for printing reading materials. You can even access CK-12 FlexBooks offline using the Offline Reader app. Another strategy is that as an alternative to lecture, you can use CK-12 FlexBooks that now have some embedded practice questions. This would be an option in which you could, instead of going and being the traditional stage on the stage, you can go and you can have your students read through the material at their own pace, and they could even answer questions to keep them engaged with the material that they're reading. And you could come back together as a whole class, and you could potentially discuss that what the students are learning. So with these different strategies being introduced, we're going to go ahead and take a look at a video featuring Chris Pickens explaining how FlexBooks has really changed his teaching practice.
This is the funnest year I've ever had. These students have the level of engagement with the Chromebooks and the CK-12 and just the variety of resources that are out there that are online is just amazing. It's changed my career. I think the students can sense that. I'm excited to come into school every day because I'm learning something new every day. I didn't realize that something this simple as a Chromebook and some online textbooks could change the way that I teach that much, but it's been pretty much a door that has opened that I can't close anymore. And I think that the future in science and in teaching is going to be amazing. I've been telling my principal that I think in the next couple of years, like Canfield is going to be like blasting off like a rocket ship. I mean, there's so much cool stuff going on out there.
Thanks, Chris. So with that being said, we're now going to actually take a moment and kind of demonstrate some of these different strategies that I just talked about, just so you can kind of get an idea and really see these ideas in practice. So the first one that I wanted to demonstrate is I talked about this idea of using CK-12 FlexBooks as a playlist model. So let's say that I wanted to create a new FlexBook from scratch. So all I have to do is, if I'm on the CK-12 website, at this top bar up here, I'll see my library. And if I click on my library, this will take me to all of the resources that I've created. It also has this Create New button. And if I click on this, this is where I can go ahead and I can create my own FlexBook textbook from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to call it Using FlexBooks with Students. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this resource. At this point now, I have the ability to add any type of resources that I want to this particular resource. If you see here, on the left-hand column, you'll see this button where it says Add to FlexBook Textbook. I can go anywhere on the CK-12 website, find a resource that I like, click that button, and add that content directly to my FlexBook. For the purposes of this webinar, I have created an idea of some different playlists you could potentially use. So using that process, I created a FlexBook from scratch. Then I created a section on cells. And what I did is I created all of these different resources for my students. So let's say they were learning about cells one day, and rather than, maybe it's an at-home assignment, or maybe rather than doing a lecture that day, it was going to be like an independent activity for students. So this first section right here is the traditional read that I found on CK-12. So I went to the read and I added it to my FlexBook textbook. And then the other thing that I like doing is you can embed some videos, but I also embedded the practice. And so what you could do, you want to make sure that if you want to see the reports for that practice, you want to assign it to your students. So you could assign this FlexBook. Within this FlexBook, you'd want to assign this practice. But you can put the practice right here inside of this read so that students have the ability to directly interact with any types of questions you might want them to do while they're reading this particular resource. If I go ahead and I go back to my overall section, like let's say I'm a student, well, I can see that my teacher also included some more recent news articles. So perhaps I might want to see some more modern context of like, why is it important that I'm learning about cells? So here's like a news article from MIT that I have included for my students. They can go ahead and they can access this news article. So I'm trying to make a fully encompassing resource that gives my students the ability to go ahead and learn about this topic with whatever resources might be best for them. Something else that you could particularly use is CK-12 offers a lot of interactive content, specifically our PLIX, which is for play, learn, interact, and explore. And so what you can do is the PLIX, the best way to share those with your students would be to go and find a PLIX you want and then copy the URL. And so then I just pasted the URL right here to that PLIX. And if I go ahead and open this up, my student would now be able to easily access this interactive content so that they can go ahead and they can learn about this particular topic by actually engaging with some interactive material. So I can go here and I can learn about what's actually going to be diffused through this cell membrane. And so as a student, it even has some challenge questions to help me really see if I'm understanding this topic in a particularly more engaging way. So with all of these different resources at the student's disposal, I think it provides a really good resource of this idea of like playlist-based learning, where you're giving your students all kinds of content in order to learn a topic. So that's what I meant with this idea of playlist-based learning, where you could have either a chapter or a section where you just put different types of content for your students to go and access. The second idea and demonstration I wanted to show, and then we'll stop for some question and answer, is this idea of, as an alternative to lecture, you could use our FlexBooks that have questions directly inside the content. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share a new screen. All right, so I'm going to go to CK-12. So I'm now on a student account. So as a student, if I go to any of our concept collection FlexBooks, which is something that you can share with them, and I'll show you how right now, all of the read is going to have the adaptive practice embedded in the read. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So this is going to be another way that you can find FlexBooks that are the best to use with your students. So if I just go ahead and I scroll down here to the bottom of the page and I click Show All Subjects, these are all of the subjects that CK-12 offers content on. So let's say that I am looking at teaching a physical science course. So if I click on physical science, right here, there's a list of all the concepts. I can go ahead and find any information on that particular concept, and there'll be a lot of resources. But if I want to find a FlexBook textbook, I will go right here and I'll click on FlexBook textbook. I'll see that there are two resources available for me to use. Anything with the word concept in the title is going to be our concept collection FlexBooks that have the adaptive practice included. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this concept collection FlexBook because I know that's the one that I want. And I am going to go ahead and I'm going to go to this chapter on chemical interactions. And I am going, ooh, that looks good, some more. I'm going to go ahead and go into this chemical bond. And I'll see that as a student, if this was assigned to me, I'll actually have this interactive adaptive practice embedded directly into the content. So you could assign this page directly to your student. They would open up this page. They would have all of the content here that we want them to access. And then it would also have this adaptive practice assignment that's embedded directly into the assignment. This would give them a little bit more of an engaging way in which to interact with the content. So at that point, we'll take a quick moment and see if there's any questions that we're going to answer.
You had a question, Ryan, about this as an alternative to lecturing. Is it possible to incorporate video segments of short lectures using, for example, Screencast-O-Mat?
Yes, you certainly could. In terms of when you're looking at content, you can always embed into our content. So let me go ahead and just open up. So I'll have to go back to my teacher account real quick. But in our content, you can go ahead and you can directly embed any type of video. So you can go from YouTube and you can embed something. You can go ahead and you can embed content from, let's say, make your own video. You can upload that video and embed it into the content. But all you have to do is you go ahead and you edit that content. So I'll find a section in my library. So here's a section on plant characteristics in my library. And if I go ahead and I click edit, I can see that one of the options is this idea where I can insert or edit media. And it's asking me for an embed code. So if I go on YouTube and I get that video that I created, I can go ahead and copy that embed code, paste it right here, and easily enough, that video is now going to be embedded directly into my read that I'm sharing with my students.
And you can really do this with anything that has an embed code. I think in the chat earlier, I saw people talking about Prezis, about Google Slides, anything that has an embed code that maybe you've already made for your classes. You can certainly insert that into your FlexBook. Ryan, we have a request to see how can students mark the text and take notes?
Great. So what students can do is, let me go ahead and finalize this resource. So in terms of the content for a student, I'm just going to go back to the homepage real quick. And I'll go ahead and just find a resource. Well, first I'll have to log on to a student account for you. Go ahead and log on to a student account. I'll go ahead and see. I'll see if there's a book already in my library. So here's a book already in my library on algebra explorations and concepts. So I'll go ahead and open up a section of the book. Let's say I'm looking at number towers. All right. So then as a student, if I go ahead and I highlight any content, I can see right here that I have this highlight tool. So I can go ahead and I can choose different colors to actually highlight the text. I can also add a note for myself. So maybe I think this is really important information. Go back and review later. So it's really that easy. So if a student, let's say you have a custom FlexBook and you've shared it with your students, they could definitely go ahead and use any of these tools, whether it's highlighting and adding notes or highlighting and actually adding a different color highlight to the resource. So the student would just select the text they want and then choose if they wanted to highlight or add a note.
Ryan, does that work on an iPad or a cell phone, or do you know what all they can do with the highlighter tool? Or do we need to ask one of our developers?
I'm not sure about the new functionality because we have just put out our new offline reader app. And so I think we'll have our developers answer that question for you in the chat window.
Okay, we had 3 questions surrounding, I think what you demoed earlier, where the practice appears beside the read. So somebody was saying, can you repeat what you just said about that? If the adaptive practice is in student view, how can I as a teacher see to preview it? And how did you get the practice and read up at the same time? So maybe just show them again what that looks like, since that is specific to the students.
Sure. So right now, this is like a typical student account. And the way that shows up, like I was mentioning, it's on our concept collection FlexBooks. So if you go ahead and you go into our FlexBooks, which I'm going to look at chemistry this time. I'm going to click on FlexBook textbooks. Anything that has this word concept in it is our concept collection, where the content is broken down into smaller chunks, and those chunks have adaptive practice associated with it. So this CK-12 chemistry basic book will not have that adaptive practice embedded in it by default, whereas this chemistry concepts book will. And so if I'm a student and I go to any section within this book, it will have the adaptive practice embedded inside of the content. In terms of if you were a teacher and you wanted to assign this to your class, you could do it a couple of ways. You could just assign the specific section. So if I go right here and I click share to my groups, as a teacher, that would share this section with your class, and they would be able to access it, and they would have the embedded practice there available for them. But let's say you wanted to look and see what that practice looked like before you're actually assigning it to your class. You would want to go ahead and navigate to that topic. So you can go ahead and navigate to physical properties. So I'll open that teacher account real quick. And we'll go ahead and we'll go to this topic of physical properties. Physical properties. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to that concept. And as a teacher, if I go ahead and I go to and I find that particular topic that I was going to assign to my students, I can go ahead, and this is the best way to preview those questions, is if you go ahead, you click on the adaptive practice assignment itself, you can go ahead and you can see what that practice is going to look like that you're assigning to your students.
All right. So since the focus of this session is really on some strategies, I think we're going to get back to that. We still have a lot of questions in our Q&A window, and I think Star is answering a bulk of those via text. Ryan will answer more here in a minute, but I'm going to steal the screen back, and we're going to talk about more strategies. So let me grab this. And here we go.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. So like we said, we're going to jump into some more strategies because we really want to give you a strategy that will be directly usable to you. And we're glad there's lots of questions coming in. So another possible strategy is that you could have students create their own videos to recap sections. These videos could then be utilized as review assignments or even potentially included in future FlexBooks to make them more engaging for your students. Another idea is you could have students create their own real-world applications. When students make their own real-world examples, this could help provide them the ability to really analyze, evaluate, and create connections with content and real-world examples. Another idea is you could use FlexBooks as a translation assignment. Since we have a wealth of FlexBooks, you could really work on translating these FlexBooks into foreign languages, and this would help benefit the entire CK-12 community if you end up publishing any types of these translated resources. Another really valuable idea, I think, is that you could provide differentiated reading materials for your students. So imagine providing, one or multiple texts for your students where the levels are at a level that's appropriate to them. So CK-12 actually offers content at the basic, advanced, and add grade level. This is a great way to provide the appropriate resources for each of your students. Another idea is that you could use CK-12 resources as a science notebook. Let's say you have a class FlexBook that you're using. Your students could then customize that resource and then use that in order to fully engage in. They could add graphs, they could add notes, but it would be a way to allow students to be fully involved in the coursework that they're doing. So with this being said, we're going to take a moment, and we're going to take a look at a video featuring Jenna Morris explaining how FlexBooks can be used to differentiate resources for her students.
I have an amazing special ed teacher in my room right now, and she uses my book. She looks ahead of what we're doing, and so she can make accommodations and modifications for students. And we've actually talked about how cool it would be to take each book and make a special ed modified and accommodation section, and that would be awesome in my book, to go ahead and have that special ed teacher to modify and accommodate for each student, for each book.
All right, so thanks for that. We're now going to take a moment and we're going to do another demonstration followed by an opportunity to answer more of your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And what we're going to be looking at right now is we are going to be looking at this idea of creating a science notebook for your students. So let's go ahead and say, I've taken a CK-12 resource, the CK-12 biology book, and I've created my own custom version. Then as a student, if they go to that resource, they could click on customize and they would have their own version in their library. At this point, the student could then do all kinds of really cool things with the resource, including adding graphs, charts. They could definitely use the notes and highlighting tool like we already showed you. But if they go ahead and customize that resource, that really gives them the ability to go ahead and add more engaging content. So let's say in my class, I was doing an activity where students were doing a lab on plant characteristics. And as a student, I thought it would be particularly useful if I go to this resource and I actually wanted to edit this resource. So if I go to this resource, this is actually from my teacher account, I'm sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open that in my student account. So the way I know that it's in my particular textbook is if I go ahead and I click, there should be an edit option. So I'll go ahead and I'll save this into my library so that I can edit it as a student. So if the student goes and they go into the content that they want, they could actually customize that content. And then let's say that student wanted to add a table because they were doing a lab on, analyzing plants in their class. So maybe it has leaf types. Maybe it has a defining characteristic. And maybe it has the color type. The student could then go ahead and enter a chart. They could maybe rearrange some text. They could include a data table here that might be useful for them. It's just an opportunity for a student to take that resource that you provided them and maybe engage with it a little bit further so that they could go ahead and they could include any type of resource they want. In terms of this resource, this is going to be the student's resource, though. This is now going to be their own resource for their particular reference. So at this point, we'll take a moment and we'll look at a couple of questions that might have come in.
We have several questions about this idea of teacher and student accounts. I think people are a little perplexed if everybody has the option to switch between those accounts. I think teachers are curious, can they flip over and see student views?
That's a great question. I'm sorry if I've confused you. I wanted to show both perspectives today. In terms of the easiest way to tell, so what I have done is I have created a demo physics student account so that for the purposes of, like, let's say I create an assignment or if I create a resource and I want to see how that looks, I'll go ahead and assign that resource to this student account that I created. In terms of when you're signing up for an account, it asks you for your information, whether you're a student or a teacher. Obviously, if you're a teacher creating an account, I would recommend going ahead and creating that as account as a teacher user. So it will ask you these questions when you're signing up. The only reason I created this student account is for a demonstration purpose, so I could go ahead and I could see what that looks like. But let's say I was going to the CK-12 website for the first time, and when I go ahead and I say that I want to join CK-12, I have the opportunity to either sign up as a student, or I could go ahead and I could sign up as a teacher. And I could do that in a variety of ways, but on registration is when it asks you for that information if you're a student or a teacher.
Okay, we have about 4 questions that all relate to students. So let me just throw a few at you here, Ryan, and see if you can tackle a bunch of these. Can I prevent a student from editing my FlexBook? Somebody else says, did Ryan say whether or not the teacher can view the student notebook customization? Somebody else said, when students edit the FlexBook, would it show up in the teacher FlexBook also? And then what's the purpose of students editing FlexBooks? Maybe clarify what happens when a student wants to customize a book, and then why might they do that?
Okay, great. So to answer this, why don't I maybe just go to like a new resource to kind of show how this works. So in terms of when a student is customizing a resource, they are not editing your FlexBook that the whole class is seeing, but rather once they click customize, it's creating a unique version that lives in their library. So let's say, for example, this was my class FlexBook that was assigned to me. If I take that FlexBook and I click the customize button, it's now creating a version that lives in my library. So this is only Ryan's version of the book. It's no longer a class version. And at that point, I could go ahead and I could edit that resource. In terms of the benefit that I could see your students getting, like I was just showing with particularly, I was a high school physics teacher, and something that my students would do a lot is they would do labs in class and taking lots of data. And I felt like it could be a useful place if they were doing something very specific to the class material. They could add a data table directly into their resource for their own benefit. But of course, it's not a requirement that the students edit the FlexBook. I just think it could be a way in which you really encourage the students to engage with the content in their class. But to answer the question, no, it's not going to edit the content in your class FlexBook. The student is going to create their own version that they can now work off of from that point.
Okay, and once a student customizes, what would be the best way for a teacher to see how they've added their notes and things to their book?
So the way I would recommend, let's say a student has done some work on a particular section. Let's say a student did a lab in this section on location and direction. An easy way would be if they just copy this URL, would be one way that they could share it with their teacher. Another way is that there is this share plane button at the bottom of the screen here. That gives me the option to share it on Google Classroom, maybe on Facebook, Twitter, or Pinterest, or simple enough, you could even just enter an email right here. So that would be a really easy way that the student could share that content back with their teachers by using this, either copying that URL and maybe just pasting it if you're using like a particular assignment structure, or you can use this green share plane button. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and move on to looking at some more strategies, and then we'll keep answering all of the great questions that you guys are having after we look at a couple of more strategies. So another strategy you could potentially use is you can use FlexBooks as a support resource. So you could produce a student-created FlexBook. Let's say they were doing a project or a unit. Students could create a FlexBook on a particular topic, as a project, essentially. It's a great way to house a bunch of content. It houses multimedia content really beautifully. Like we showed you, can embed all kinds of great stuff. Another idea is that you can use it as a way to support non-English native speakers. And we'll show that in just a moment, because we do have FlexBooks that have been translated into Spanish as a potential resource. And we have a Google Translate API that can help use Google Translate to provide the best translation possible to support that particular student. Another idea is that you can use a FlexBook as a common curriculum. You could use this for a department. You can use this for a grade level team. You could even use this for a whole district. So you could create a FlexBook that doesn't have to be an outward-facing document for the students, but rather as a reference document for your teachers to share, for your district to share, a way to share like even best practices, learning objectives, all of these things. So at this point, we're going to take a look at one last video talking about how Dr. Cynthia Ontiveros explains how FlexBooks have really helped support their parent community.
Parents, I believe, are an untapped resource that really districts, schools, teachers, we really need to think about how we can incorporate them into the learning process of our students, of our children. One example, I met a man who had just come over to the United States from the Philippines, and he brought his two daughters who didn't know English, but they were working very hard in their classrooms. And he asked me, what could he do to support them? What books could he buy? And it clicked to me, and I took out my iPad and I took him to the CK-12.org website, and I showed him, we talked about what concept is she learning right now. We looked it up, and I showed him the magic button where he could switch the language so that he can read the language, understand the content that his daughter was learning, and then be able to explain to her in his language, in their language. And the gentleman was nearly in tears, and myself too, because he was so excited that he had a resource that was free, that was available to him to be able to use, and he can go home and use it that night, right after our conversation. So for me, that is important for us to consider the role of the parent and bringing the parents involved in the process. You know, our children are going to bring home difficult homework concepts that maybe been years since they were in the classroom or just didn't learn that material. And so as a parent, it's important for us to, or as an educator, it's important to give parents those resources so they can find a way to connect with their children and be a resource and really bring that home to school connection, make that a reality.
Great. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I just want to show you how to find those resources in a different language, like Dr. Ontiveros was talking about. So if I go ahead and I'm on CK-12 and I do a quick search for Spanish, because as I have mentioned, we did receive a grant in order to translate some FlexBooks into Spanish. I can go ahead and I can find these resources that have been specifically hand translated into Spanish. And so there are great resources if you have any Spanish students that could potentially use a resource in their native text. The other way is not necessarily a direct translation. It's using the Google Translate tool, which is what Dr. Ontiveros was referring to. So let's just say I go back and I browse to any subject. So let's say I go ahead and I go into a biology FlexBook, because that's what I'm using with my students. And I go ahead and I open a biology FlexBook. At the very bottom of the screen, I'll actually see this option to use Google Translate's API to translate it into a different language. So let's say I have a student that's French speaking and I don't have a lot of resources to help this student. At this point, from now on, anytime I'm looking at this resource, since I have chosen French, that student will see a Google Translate function to translate the resource into French at that point. So I just wanted to kind of show that. That's what the video was referring to. At least we have the option to try and support students in a different language using this API. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to English. The last thing I wanted to show you was this idea of this teacher resource that I think could be really useful. So I know there's been a lot of chatter about like teachers using the FlexBooks as resources for them. And this could be another great way that teachers could use FlexBooks to share with other teachers. So let's go ahead, and this time we're going to browse by this idea of, we're going to look at FlexBooks that different schools have actually created. So I know that in the Tullahoma City schools in Tennessee, they've done some great work in terms of English language arts, because that was content that traditionally we didn't offer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go and find Tullahoma City schools here. I'm going to go ahead and go to their schools page. They have a lot of resources in terms of the English language arts, history, and they've created a lot of resources. Some of them are directly meant for the students to go ahead and use, but in terms of this resource was specifically created to be used as a teacher resource. So if I go ahead and I look at this resource, it has all types of standards, it has learning targets, it has ideas for activities that teachers could do. So it's much more meant to be a document that only teachers can see in order to help them prepare for the lesson for that day, or maybe for a conversation they're having on a curriculum alike team. So that's just a great idea. Another way of using FlexBooks is not just for a student-facing resource, but another teacher-facing resource.
All right, so in the interest of time, as we're approaching that hour mark, I'm going to talk to you about your assignment and the wrap-up information, and then our team, fingers are flying in here. We're working as quickly as we can to answer your questions. That's awesome that you guys have so many specific questions. That means that you're really thinking about how you can use these resources. I am, when I give the screen back to Ryan, maybe something he can pull up is, again, how to access the help desk, because a lot of what you guys are asking, I think if you went to our help desk, you would find a link, an article that's going to tell you how to do these things on our site. So we'll proceed with demos and questions here in a moment. But the link that you guys need, those of you who are on the path to becoming CK-12 certified, here's your tiny URL. It's CEP-17 FB students. This is the last session of the summer, other than the 2 maximizing learning sessions that we have coming up. So again, we're about to wrap things up here. So this assignment, please try to finish it within a week of your webinar session. You'll find it at CEP-17 Facebook student, or not Facebook, sorry, FB FlexBook students. Then that's also available, as you guys know, on our Certified 2017 page. You can access the link there. Tomorrow we'll have the archive video up if you wanted to see anything again or share it with a colleague. You can access lots of good information on this page. This is our general feedback form, not a requirement, but we do love hearing from you guys. So if you want to fill out the CEP 2017 feedback form, we'd love to hear what's been going well from you and what we could do better in the future. Support at CK12.org is the email address that you guys need as you have ongoing questions. Once you really start diving in, it looks like a lot of you are at that stage where you're making cool changes to CK-12's FlexBooks, and you're trying things out and working on seeing what you can embed. And if our help desk isn't able to help you online, shoot an email and we'll make sure that you guys get the support you need, whether it's the summer or whether it's throughout the school year. And then on the socials, you can follow us at CK12 Foundation. So those of you who need to sign off, you're welcome to go ahead and leave the webinar at this time. If you're somebody who's got an open Q&A, please hang with us. We're going to try to address as many of those as possible. So I'm kicking it back to you, Ryan. See whose questions you're ready to tackle.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of these questions, and then I'll go ahead and share my screen and do some demonstrations. So this, one of these questions says, are there recommendations of customized FlexBooks for high school Algebra 1 and Geometry? Based on experiences, especially working with special ed students with lower cognitive levels. So in terms of resources, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you where you might at least find a good starting point for a resource to look at. If I go ahead and first I could go ahead and look at a specific, the CK-12 text. So we were talking about algebra and geometry. If I go ahead and go into algebra, something that's particularly good about our algebra books is that we have a great wealth of resources because algebra is sometimes taught at both the middle school and the high school level. So this could potentially be really helpful. You could potentially find a textbook that has a grade level reading that maybe is a little bit more basic. So I have this option here. There's this great filter where I can choose basic or at grade level. So that will basically tell me which of these FlexBooks might be designated for a more basic reading level. There's also this idea of different types of content for a variety of grade levels, which could be useful. So this could be a good starting point for you, is to find the resource that is best. In terms of another way to look at resources, we talked about that idea of looking at the schools page and finding districts that might be nearby in which to use that resource as a starting point. So I know that there's a district in Texas, in El Paso, EPISD, which has done a lot of work in order to customize FlexBooks for themselves. So I'm going to go down and go here, and I can see that they have all of these resources, and I could find the algebra book that's specifically tied to that state standards. You could do that for your state, and that might give you a really valuable starting point. Another idea is you could always use the search feature. So maybe I can look and I can say like Algebra 1, and then if I look over here, something that the question was referring to is finding things that are kind of more curated. So I can go ahead and I can look at the community contributed, and then I can look and I can specifically choose FlexBook textbooks. And all of these resources are going to be resources that are specifically curated by these users. So I could add things like special ed if I'm looking for a special ed book, or maybe I'll look up the idea of the word advanced. But that's another way that I could find resources that have already been customized to that point by that user. So another question that was asked said, could you demonstrate how to embed practice and quizzes into a FlexBook? Sure. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go ahead and we will find a adaptive practice assignment that we want to embed into a FlexBook textbook. So let's go ahead and say we want to add this idea. Let's go ahead and choose rocks as a topic. So if I go into this topic of rocks, and then I go ahead and I find the adaptive practice, if I go down here to the three little dots and I click on that, one of these options that I'll see right here is this embed. So what I do is I could just take this, I'm going to copy this embed, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to paste that into the resource that I want to embed that practice into. So let's say that I'm going to be using it and I'm going to be putting it into that biology book I was working on earlier. I'll go ahead and I'll open up a section that I want to embed this adaptive practice into. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to edit it. And like we might have seen earlier, there's this idea where I can insert or edit media. So let's say I want to put it right here. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click Insert Edit Media. I'm going to paste that embed code. I can go ahead and preview it just to make sure it's what I want. Yep, so that's the practice that I wanted to embed. And I can click Insert. And then when I know a multimedia item has been embedded, I will see this icon to tell me that there is some multimedia at that point. And then if I go ahead and I click Finalize, it's now going to save that section of my FlexBook, and the adaptive practice has been embedded into that resource. So another question was about, can I prevent a student from editing my FlexBook? So in terms of can you prevent a student from editing your Flexbook, we kind of talked about this idea a little bit earlier, where if a student customizes or edits a resource, well then at that point, they're now creating a separate version. So the student is not editing the teacher's Flexbook. The student is editing and making a new copy of that particular document. So in terms of, you don't have to worry if you're using a Flexbook with your class, that document is not going to be changed by your students accessing that document. Someone asked, can I show the translation again? Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So like I said, at the very bottom of the page, we have a Google API. So this is using Google Translate. So it'd be the same as if you went to Google Translate online and you typed in text and it translated it to a different language. So let's say, for example, this time I wanted to translate it. Let's do Polish. So if I go ahead and I look at this text, Google Translate is going to be translating all of this content into Polish for me at this point to the best of its ability. So those resources that we had specifically translated, like I talked about, we do have some Spanish resources. And an easy way to find those is to search Spanish. I'm going to want to turn it off of Polish so that I can read it again. And here are those resources specifically in Spanish that have been hand translated. So there are these resources, or you can use at the bottom of the page, you can use this Google Translate functionality to try and assist that student. Another question that I'll answer real quick. It says, it's talking about the cafe. In terms of the cafe, the way it works is we actually have the ability to upvote answers. And so at this point, that is the best way to help designate an answer in the cafe. So we'll wait for another minute or two to see if any more questions come in. And if not, we'll be ending the session shortly.
You got some great feedback while you were presenting, Ryan. Some users saying that they already use FlexBooks, but now they might be able to differentiate them, and loves being able to gather all the materials right in the textbook. So that's exactly right. That's awesome. We've got something else in the Q&A here. Let's see. Talking about Cornell Notes might be a valuable tool. They do customize the Flexbook, and later on during the semester, I make changes to the Flexbook. Would they get the updated version, or would they still be using ones they customize? Okay, so this is a question that comes up frequently about if a teacher is making changes to the Flexbook throughout the year, do they need to do anything special to get the students that most updated version?
So if a student is opening a resource that needs to be updated, there will be an icon on the resource with a little update button. And if they click on that, it will update it to the most recent version.
Once they've customized it, they have a separate copy.
Okay, so I was just told that if they customize it, they would have a separate copy. And so it would not be able to update. And so if you're hoping to use a resource with your students, and you want them to see the most recent version, as long as they're using the same resource all year, it is going to be always showing the most up-to-date information. And so if you want to be able to make changes to your Flexbook over the course of the year and have them reflected for your students, you should only have them using that initial resource that you give them. Once they customize, it will not be able to reflect any of those updates that you're making.
We have a question about what to do for students who do not have laptops in schools and no internet at home.
Yeah, that's a great question. So something I might recommend is, like we talked about a little bit earlier, CK-12 does offer a variety of apps. So if I go ahead and I take a look down here at the bottom of the page, it shows me that we do offer an Android app. We have an iOS app. There is a really great resource for this particular case where you could have the offline reader app. This app is particularly useful because the student, let's say they go to the library, they could go ahead and download either a chapter or the entire book that their teacher might have shared with them. And then they can go home and they wouldn't even need internet access at that point. They could even use any device. So they could have it on their smartphone, they could have it on a tablet they might have, but it doesn't even necessarily need to have a computer at that point. So we're really trying to make our resources accessible to all types of students.
Okay, I want to thank you all for joining us for our session today. I imagine we'll see a lot of you over the next 2 days for our maximizing learning sessions. So we look forward to continuing the conversation then. Thank you.